Welcome to WW2 Heroic Tales, where true stories of courage, sacrifice, and extraordinary heroism come alive from the darkest days of World War II. Join us as we uncover the untold moments that shaped history. The year is 1943. Berlin, the sprawling capital of the Third Reich, is a city of contradictions. By day, the streets pulse with a facade of wartime normalcy. Banners bearing the swastika hang from every building, their stark red a constant reminder of the regime's power. The air hums with the sound of trams, military vehicles, and the clipped pronouncements of propaganda from public loudspeakers. This is the nerve center of Hitler's war machine, a metropolis of stone, steel, and unyielding ideology. But beneath this veneer of order, another reality festers. A reality of whispers, of furtive glances, of a terror that seeps through the cracks of every apartment block. The Gestapo, the regime's secret state police, are an invisible, omnipresent force. Their headquarters at Prince Albrechtstrasse 8 is a place of nightmares, a bureaucratic hub of persecution from which directives of arrest and deportation flow like a toxic river. By this point in the war, the Nazi plan for the Jews of Europe is in its most horrific phase. Since the Wannsee Conference in January 1942, the final solution has been official policy. The mass deportations from Berlin have escalated dramatically. Entire neighborhoods are being systematically cleared. Jews are rounded up in nightly raids, herded into collection camps, and then forced onto cattle cars bound for the death camps in the east. The official term is resettlement, a sterile word designed to mask an industrial-scale operation of genocide. For Berlin's remaining Jewish population, life has become an agonizing countdown. Every knock on the door, every shout in the street, every passing patrol could be the end. The choice is stark and terrifying. Obey the summons for deportation, a certain path to annihilation, or attempt the impossible, to vanish within the very heart of the beast. As the machinery of deportation ground relentlessly onward, a new, desperate class of people was born in Berlin's shadows: the U-boats. The term, U-Boot in German, was grimly fitting. Like the submarines of the Kriegsmarine, these individuals had submerged, disappearing from the surface of society to navigate a silent, perilous existence beneath. They were German Jews who, faced with the final summons for deportation, chose to defy it. They ripped the mandatory yellow stars from their coats, destroyed their identity papers, and slipped into the anonymity of the metropolis. To go underground was an act of ultimate defiance, but it was a life sentence of another kind. It meant absolute isolation. A U-boat had no legal existence. They could not work, own property, or officially reside anywhere. Crucially, they had no access to ration cards. In a city where every scrap of bread, every potato, was strictly controlled, this meant a constant, gnawing hunger. Survival depended entirely on the charity and courage of others. Life became a series of calculated risks. Days were spent in hiding, perhaps in a cramped attic, a damp cellar, or a sympathizer's spare room, often in complete silence to avoid alerting neighbors. A single cough at the wrong time could be fatal. Nights offered a brief respite, a chance to move through the blacked out streets under the cover of darkness, seeking food or a new, safer hiding place. The psychological toll was immense. It was a life of perpetual fear, a constant state of alert where the sound of footsteps on the stairs or the engine of a slowing car could trigger a surge of pure adrenaline. There was the ever-present threat of betrayal, not just from Nazi sympathizers, but from Greifer, catchers, who were often Jews themselves, coerced by the Gestapo into hunting their own people in exchange for their own safety. For the U-boats, trust was both a rare currency and a deadly gamble. In this landscape of systematic persecution, heroism emerged from the most unexpected quarters. It was not the organized, armed resistance seen in other parts of occupied Europe. In Berlin, it was a quieter, more insidious form of rebellion, practiced by ordinary citizens who made an extraordinary choice. These were the still Helden, the silent heroes. They were doctors, factory workers, housewives, priests, and civil servants. And among them, playing a unique and vital role, were the city's firefighters. The Berlin Fire Brigade, the Berliner Feuerwehr, was an integral part of the city's civil infrastructure. Like all state employees, they were expected to be loyal to the regime. Their daily duties brought them into every corner of the city, giving them an intimate knowledge of its buildings and its people. They conducted fire safety inspections, responded to emergencies, and, as the Allied bombing campaign intensified, they became frontline responders in a city under aerial assault. This very role gave them a unique form of access and a degree of public trust. A man in a firefighter's uniform could enter a building without arousing the same suspicion as a Gestapo agent. He had a legitimate reason to be in cellars, attics, and back rooms, places where people might be hiding. While the organization itself was part of the state apparatus, individual firefighters possessed a moral autonomy. They saw firsthand the suffering of the populace and the brutality of the regime. For some, the disconnect between their duty to save lives and the state's mission to destroy them became unbearable. These men, whose names are largely lost to history, made a choice. They decided to use their position not to enforce the regime's will, but to subvert it in small, critical ways. An act of defiance might be as simple as a moment of deliberate blindness, a choice not to see what was right in front of them. The survival of Berlin's U-boats depended on an intricate, unspoken network of support, a fragile ecosystem of courage that historians call rings of trust and silence. These were not formal organizations with leaders and membership roles. They were spontaneous, decentralized webs of individuals connected by a shared sense of humanity. A successful rescue often involved a chain of several people, each performing a small, deniable act that, when combined, could save a life. The chain might begin with a neighbor who noticed the Goldstein family hadn't answered their deportation notice. Instead of reporting them, she leaves a small bag of bread and potatoes by their back door in the dead of night. She then mentions to her cousin, a clerk at the municipal registry, that the Goldstein's file seems to have been misplaced. The clerk, at immense personal risk, removes the file from the active cabinet, effectively erasing the family from the bureaucratic manhunt for a precious few weeks. but they need to move. The clerk knows a firefighter who lives on his block, a man he has shared a beer with and trusts implicitly. He quietly asks if the firefighter knows of any empty, forgotten spaces in the buildings on his route. The firefighter, during a routine inspection of an apartment block's cellar, forgets to note that a disused coal storage room has a recently repaired lock. He passes the information back. Now, the family has a temporary hiding place. This is the ring of trust. Each link is a potential point of failure. A single informant, a moment of weakness under interrogation, or even a carelessly spoken word to the wrong person could cause the entire chain to collapse, leading to the arrest, torture, and execution of everyone involved. The operative principle was silence. Rescuers rarely spoke of their activities, even to their own families. They did not seek recognition. Their reward was not glory, but the quiet knowledge of a life saved. For them, heroism was a silent, anonymous duty, performed in the shadows while the world above burned. Imagine a cold, damp evening in the autumn of 1943. A firefighter, we can call him Anton, is part of a small team performing a post-incident check in a working-class district like Wedding or Prenzlauer Berg. An incendiary bomb from an earlier raid had been dealt with, but now they must inspect the building's structural integrity and clear any remaining hazards. The air is thick with the acrid smell of burnt timber and damp plaster. As his colleagues work on the upper floors, Anton's duty is to inspect the cellars. He moves down the stone steps, his heavy boots echoing in the stillness. The beam of his flashlight cuts through the darkness, revealing a labyrinth of small, locked storage units for each apartment. He checks each one, ensuring the locks are secure and there are no smoldering embers. Then he comes to the last one. The lock is new, unlike the others. It's a small detail, but in this city of secrets, small details matter. His training and his civic duty demand he report the anomaly. The block warden, a zealous party member, would be notified, and the Gestapo would follow. He knows what, or rather who, they would likely find inside. This is the moment of truth, the crossroads of conscience. On one side is his duty to the state, his own safety, and the security of his family. The law is clear. Hiding a Jew is a capital offense. Aiding an enemy of the Reich is punishable by death, often by hanging as a public deterrent. On the other side is his duty to his fellow human being. He thinks of the faces he has seen at the collection points, the fear in the eyes of the children. He thinks of the stories whispered among his crew about what happens in the camps in the East. He stands there for a long minute, the silence of the cellar pressing in on him. He can hear the faint rumble of the city above and the beating of his own heart. Then he makes his choice. He takes his chalk, marks the cellar door with the standard inspected and cleared symbol, and turns away. He walks back up the stone steps, his face an impassive mask. He has seen nothing. In that simple, silent act of omission, he has committed a profound act of rebellion and saved a life, risking his own in the process. For the hidden U-boats of Berlin, the wail of the air raid siren was a sound of compound terror. For the city's Aryan population, it signaled a frantic rush to the relative safety of the public bomb shelters, the Luftschutzkeller. But for a Jew in hiding, The siren was a death knell with two possible outcomes. The first option was to remain in their hiding place, an attic, a factory loft, a secret annex. As the formations of RAF Lancasters and American B-17s droned overhead, they would huddle in the darkness, praying that the 500-pound general-purpose bombs and the city-burning incendiaries would fall elsewhere. They were utterly alone, listening to the world being torn apart around them, the thunder of explosions shaking the very foundations of their sanctuary. A direct hit meant certain death, buried under tons of rubble with no one to dig them out. The second option was even more perilous. They could risk leaving their hiding place and attempting to blend into the panicked crowds running for the public shelters. This was a desperate gamble. The entrances to these shelters were controlled by block wardens, typically fanatical Nazis tasked with maintaining order and racial purity. They checked papers and knew the faces of the residents. To be discovered as a Jew trying to enter a shelter was to be caught red-handed. The wardens would hold them until the all-clear, at which point they would be handed directly to the Gestapo. This is where another form of silent heroism could manifest. A firefighter on duty at a large public shelter, amidst the chaos of a raid, might be the one manning the door. In the stream of terrified faces, in the smoke and confusion, he might see a person he knows is not supposed to be there, someone with fear in their eyes that goes beyond the bombs. He could raise the alarm, or he could look them in the eye, give a barely perceptible nod, and turn his attention elsewhere for a crucial second, allowing them to slip past into the relative safety of the concrete walls. This act, a moment of willful negligence, was a lifeline in a city intent on their destruction. Beyond offering a fleeting moment of shelter or a morsel of food, one of the most powerful forms of assistance was the provision of false documents. An identity card, a work permit, or a travel pass could be the difference between life and death. For a U-boat, a convincing set of forged papers was the key to a fragile kind of freedom. It allowed them to move through the city during the day, to apply for work in a factory where labor shortages were acute, and most importantly, to present a valid identity if stopped by a police or SS patrol. Creating these documents was a highly specialized and incredibly dangerous craft. It wasn't simply a matter of writing a new name on a piece of paper. It required access to the correct type of card stock, the specific fonts used on typewriters in government offices, and most critically, the official stamps of various municipal and police authorities. Every stamp with its eagle and swastika had to be a perfect replica, or the forgery would be spotted instantly. This required a network of collaborators, perhaps a printer who could secretly produce the blank documents, or an artist with a steady hand who could replicate the intricate stamps. Civil servants were key. A clerk in a police station might be persuaded to lose a blank identity card or an official stamp for a few hours. A firefighter, with his access to various municipal buildings during inspections or emergency calls, might spot an opportunity. While his colleagues were occupied, he could potentially gain access to an office, make a wax impression of a crucial stamp, or acquire a few sheets of official letterhead. The risk was astronomical. If any part of the forging operation was discovered, the Gestapo would be relentless in tracking down every person involved. The punishment was not imprisonment, it was torture and execution. Yet, despite the danger, these forgery rings operated in the shadows of Berlin, producing the precious documents that gave the hunted a chance to reclaim a name and a face, to walk in the sun, even if it was under a false identity. While the actions of many individual rescuers are lost to time, some stories have survived, passed down through the testimony of those they saved. The story of the Wendland family is one such account, documented by the Aurora Humanitarian Initiative's Silent Heroes Project. The Wendlands were not firefighters or government officials. They were an ordinary family who embodied the extraordinary courage of Berlin's civilian rescuers. Residing in the city, they made the conscious and perilous decision to open their home to Jews who had gone underground. Their story illustrates the deep personal sacrifices these rescues entailed. In a city of shortages, every meal was a struggle. Sharing their already meager rations meant that the Wendlands themselves often went hungry. Every drop of water, every lump of coal for the stove, had to be stretched to support their hidden guests. The danger was not a distant threat. It was a constant, intimate presence. The family had to maintain an elaborate charade for their neighbors, for the prying eyes of the block warden, and for any unexpected visitors. The hidden Jews had to live in absolute silence during the day, often confined to a single room, unable to make a sound that might betray their presence. The Wendland children had to be taught the grave importance of the family's secret, a terrible burden for a young mind to carry. They could never speak of their cousins who were staying with them. A single slip of the tongue in the schoolyard could have doomed them all. The Wendlands and families like them were the anchors of the rescue networks. They provided the most fundamental necessity, a safe place to exist. Their heroism was not a single, dramatic act, but a daily grind of fear, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to their fellow human beings. They were a microcosm of the silent resistance, proving that even in the heart of the Reich's darkness, the light of human decency could not be completely extinguished. For every act of rescue, there was an omnipresent counterforce, the relentless hunt conducted by the Gestapo. The secret state police did not rely solely on their own agents to root out the hidden Jews. They cultivated a pervasive climate of suspicion and fear, turning ordinary citizens into informants. A special reward was offered for information leading to the arrest of a U-boat, appealing to both greed and zealous ideology. Neighbors were encouraged to spy on each other, to report any unusual activity. Curtains that were always drawn, extra food being bought, or unfamiliar voices from a supposedly empty apartment. The most insidious weapon in the Gestapo's arsenal, however, was the use of Greifer, or catchers. These were Jewish individuals who had been caught themselves and were then blackmailed into working for the Gestapo. Faced with the choice of deportation to a death camp or betraying their own people, some tragically chose the latter. These catchers were devastatingly effective. They knew the community. They knew the places where someone might hide. They could approach a suspected U-boat with a false offer of help, lulling them into a false sense of security before turning them in. The presence of the Grafer sowed deep paranoia among the U-boats and their helpers. It became impossible to know who to trust. An outstretched hand could be a genuine offer of aid or a Gestapo trap. This made the work of the silent heroes even more fraught with peril. Every person they helped was a potential vector of discovery. A rescued Jew, if later caught and interrogated, could be tortured into revealing the names of those who had sheltered them. The rings of trust were constantly under assault, not just from the outside by the Gestapo, but from the inside by this state-sponsored betrayal. It is a testament to the rescuers' immense courage that they continued their work in the face of this multi-layered threat, knowing that the slightest misjudgment could lead to their own destruction. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945 and Berlin lay in ruins, the story of the U-boats and their rescuers did not immediately emerge. The city and the world was overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the Holocaust's horror. Of the approximately 7,000 Jews who had attempted to survive underground in Berlin, only around 1,500 to 17,000 emerged from the rubble. The rest had been caught, betrayed, or killed in the bombing. For the survivors, the future was uncertain. They were physically and psychologically scarred, often the sole remnants of their entire families. Yet, they carried with them the indelible memory of the Germans who had risked everything for them. For the rescuers, the post-war years were often marked by silence. In a nation grappling with collective guilt, many did not feel comfortable speaking about their actions. Some feared being seen as traitors by their neighbors who had supported the regime. Others simply did not view what they did as heroic. To them, it was just the decent thing to do, a private matter of conscience. Many stories were never told and died with them. It was only decades later, through the diligent work of historians and institutions like Israel's Yad Vashem, that the legacy of these silent heroes began to be formally recognized. Survivors gave testimony, and the names of rescuers were slowly added to the list of the righteous among the nations, a high honor for non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. Projects like the German Resistance Memorial Center in Berlin began to piece together these fragmented histories. The legacy of these rescuers, including the anonymous firefighters, is not one of military victory, but of moral triumph. They proved that individual choice matters, even under the most oppressive totalitarian regime. Their quiet courage stands as a powerful testament that a government can enforce laws and demand obedience, but it cannot extinguish the fundamental human capacity for compassion and decency. The memory of Berlin's silent heroes endures not in grand monuments, but in the small, brass-plated cobblestones known as Stolperstein, or stumbling stones. Embedded in the sidewalks outside the last chosen homes of victims of Nazi persecution, each stone bears a name, a date, and a fate. While most commemorate those who were murdered, some are now being placed to honor the rescuers, a permanent, street-level reminder of the light that flickered in the darkest of times. These individual stories of civil servants, neighbors, and first responders like firefighters challenge the monolithic narrative of a nation's complicity. They reveal a more complex truth. Within the heart of the Third Reich, Amidst overwhelming conformity and terror, there existed pockets of profound moral courage. Men and women who, without orders, without weapons, and without hope of reward, waged their own private war against inhumanity. Their battlefield was a cellar, their weapon was a loaf of bread or a forged document, and their victory was a single life saved. These were not supermen. They were ordinary people who refused to be passive bystanders to atrocity. They chose conscience over civic duty, humanity over ideology. Their actions remind us that history is not just made by armies and politicians, but by the countless, often anonymous choices of individuals. In honoring the silent heroes of Berlin, we honor the enduring power of the human spirit to resist evil, not with a bang, but with a whisper, a secret, and an unwavering act of compassion. Thank you for joining WW2 Heroic Tales. Through the stories of brave souls from World War II, we honor their memory and keep their legacy alive for history and generations to come.